Welcome back to Close Up, and we return to our extended interview with New Hampshire's Governor-elect Kelly Ayotte. Governor-elect, thank you for being here on this Sunday morning. Appreciate it. So you said on the campaign trail that it defies common sense to put a landfill next to Forest Lake State Park in Dalton. Now that you're going to be in charge, how are you going to stop it?
Adam, it defies common sense. I said it during the campaign trail. I got to go up to Dalton, and you know, if you've ever been up to that park up there, it's a beautiful lake and beautiful forest surrounding it. So, you know, I believe it's not consistent with the environmental character of that area. And so, you know, I'm sure the Department of Environmental Services will look at this carefully, and they're going to see the common sense of that too.
You know, if the state is really going to unleash economic growth, energy and housing are two big sort of keys that need to be unlocked to really keep the state going on a good path. You ran on an all-of-the-above energy strategy. You've been very skeptical about offshore wind in the Gulf of Maine. Hard to imagine the Trump administration is going to be super excited about that. He's been very skeptical about that as well. Even though we just saw a lease auctioned off, I think in late October, $22 million spent for companies trying to get access to the Gulf there. Do you see these projects as being less likely now as a solution to, or part of the solution to the region's energy supply problems?
Well, Adam, I think that offshore wind project is really concerning in terms of just if you look at the cost analysis of it, it doesn't make sense economically, but also our fishermen and the impact that that project will have on them. And it's important. They have an important profession, historical for New Hampshire, and I heard loud and clear from them that they believe it will destroy the fisheries there. So that's another deep concern I have about that project. It's why I don't support it, but I don't think the economics bear it out on that project either. That said, I want to make sure that we do all we can to reduce energy prices here in New Hampshire. I know the Trump administration, with President Trump coming in office, like he's going to be looking for more American energy production, and I hope that will help prices here in New Hampshire. But we're also going to look forward as new technologies get to the position where they can come to market and we can exercise them. And I talked about this on the campaign trail. Small modular nuclear reactors. I want to position New Hampshire as an early adopter for those new technologies. There's exciting technology with hydrogen happening already here in New Hampshire. So I think looking at all of the possibilities for our energy profile, and by the way, those new technologies, they're carbon neutral, so they protect our environment as well. So I think there are great opportunities, but that wind project didn't make sense.
Small-scale nuclear, the hydrogen, those are potentially years, if not decades away. Is there any project that could happen sooner than that to provide some relief to the ratepayers?
Well, I think that, number one, what can happen sooner as opposed to a particular project, we'll look at each project on its merits and make sure that it is a project that protects New Hampshire in terms of energy prices and helps our state move forward on those costs. But we're also going to make sure that, unlike other players in our region, we aren't adding costs to people's energy bills by some of the mandates that other states adopt. So Governor Sununu's done a very good job on that. I plan to continue that effort of not going by the way of some other states like Massachusetts, where energy costs end up being higher because there are mandates passed.
There's a bill being filed to eliminate New Hampshire's consumer advocate position. That's an energy-related position. Would you be on board with that?
Well, Adam, first of all, I think it's important that consumers have a voice when it comes to energy costs. I believe the Department of Energy within the governor's office, in state government, used to be in the governor's office. They should be fighting also to make sure that we're fighting for lower energy costs, and the consumer advocates doing the same. So I'll look at any proposal, but most of all, I want the consumers to have a voice in this state. They really are the ones paying the high costs.
What is going to be your response as governor if President Trump goes ahead with these threatened tariffs against Canada, potentially 25% on imports? It's being reported now Canada could retaliate in a trade war with taxes on oil and uranium. Those are two key components that we get from up north. Doesn't sound like it's going to help bring costs down for the average American there.
Well, Adam, I think that obviously Canada is an important trading partner for New Hampshire. And I look forward to actually going to Canada and really recruiting businesses from Canada to come to Berlin and North Country, and that's going to be an important part of my economic agenda when it comes to the North Country. But we've already seen with President Trump's announcement during the transition, you've already seen the Prime Minister of Canada traveled to Florida to meet with President Trump. So these are ongoing discussions. And I believe we'll continue to monitor it, but I believe these discussions are important and they're being had to make sure that we protect our economy. But Canada will continue to be an important trading partner for New Hampshire.
A tariff is a tax, though, right? As a conservative, do you think it's a good idea to be raising taxes on people?
Well, Adam, you know I don't support raising taxes, but I certainly do support protecting our country and our economy. That said, listen, they're already sitting down and talking. I believe this is a negotiation, and we'll continue to see that happen. Or, you know, the Prime Minister of Canada wouldn't have spent Thanksgiving with President Trump.
Yeah. Let's return to the legislature a little bit. On the campaign trail, you vowed again and again that you would not put any additional restrictions on abortion. You're going to veto anything that comes to your desk. Are your fellow Republicans in the legislature undermining you at all by filing bills that would do just that would put restrictions on abortion?
Well, Adam, as you know, with 400 legislators, there are always a lot of LSRs filed. We don't even have the language for those LSRs. There are hundreds and hundreds of bills. So that's their right. But I made it very clear during the campaign that I would veto any bills that came to my desk that changed New Hampshire's law. And under New Hampshire's law, women have the freedom to obtain an abortion for any reason up to the first 6 months of pregnancy. And of course, even in the last 3 months, there are important exceptions there. So if anything comes to my desk that's more restrictive, I was very clear on the campaign trail, and I think the legislators know I'll veto it.
What about issues that are sort of peripheral to the 24-week restriction? There's a bill to create criminal and civil penalties for people who transport a minor to receive an abortion without parental consent. Is that an issue that you see outside the purview of your promise not to change the law?
Adam, you know, there are so many LSRs that are filed at this point. I haven't looked at that bill. But I want people in New Hampshire to know I believe where we are right now in New Hampshire is important in terms of protecting the rights of women, and that's going to be my priority in the corner office.
On the gun law front, pro-Second Amendment, but you do want to see the state start reporting the involuntary commitments to NICS, that's the federal gun background check system. Legislature couldn't get it done the last time. How hard are you going to fight? How much political capital are you going to invest in trying to make sure that gets signed into law?
Well, first of all, I think it just makes sense because under federal law right now, if you're found a danger to yourself or others, you're actually under federal law prohibited from holding a firearm. So it's against the law right now. We saw with that situation at the New Hampshire hospital, that individual should have been prohibited from holding a firearm. Now, that wasn't a result of our system, but making sure that those records are in place are important. So I said in the campaign trail, I say now, I support that. I'll work with the legislature on this issue. I'll certainly let the legislature know that I believe it's important that they address that record issue. But it's also important that we protect the due process rights of individuals. This is a constitutional right. And just because if I'm an individual who has been subject to, I've had a mental health incident that has caused me to lose my right to firearm, we need a way to make sure that that can be restored quickly and fairly after someone receives treatment. And that's not in the law either. So I'd like to see people's rights protected on that end too. You
spoke earlier about wanting to really solve the issue with recruitment and retention in state police. They've had a real problem since COVID, being able to get to a full complement. I think I heard when I was talking to them this last week, they were only down 9 troopers in 2019. And of course, the huge vacancies that they had after COVID, I think they had 80 openings there. You want to solve the retirement issue, but there are some bills in to create incentives, like student loan forgiveness program, about $10,000 a year, signing bonus $10,000 a year. Do you think those are good ideas?
Adam, we'll look at all aspects of legislation that will address recruitment and retention here in New Hampshire. But there's no doubt in my mind there are a couple of priorities. The priority really has to be making sure that our retirement system is competitive and fair. So that's something I talked about on the campaign. We're already, working with law enforcement and fire and first responders on that issue, and it's an important issue. But in addition to that, I think we need to make sure that they know we have their backs, right? So some of these laws that were passed that undermine their ability to do their jobs, the bail law, let's make sure that we don't have a revolving door on bail. Let's make sure that we have tough penalties when it comes to those who are trafficking poison into our state. Let's make sure that we are giving them the tools so that they can keep our state safe. So yes, we're going to make sure that we're looking at the retirement issue, But all these other issues relate to what are we allowing them and the tools we have so that they can do their jobs every day in a way and they know we respect them and we have their backs.
Do you think that a full complement, hiring the last 58 troopers will make a difference in some of these horrific crashes we've seen out on the highways lately?
Oh my gosh, these crashes are awful. And, as a mother, I have a 17-year-old boy. And these issues of people with distracted driving and the enforcement on I-95 and making sure the state is safe, of course having more troopers will help that. But also we need to just get out to people in New Hampshire that this is really important, that for all of us to pay attention. All of us have that responsibility, but especially for our young people, to make sure that they know they have to follow the laws, that those laws are going to be enforced, because we need to do it for public safety. My heart goes out to these families who are impacted, that have lost someone during this holiday season just because it was distracted driving or they weren't paying attention.
One last question for you, kind of a back burner issue, but it's one that could have a lot of consequences. Congressional redistricting, the House and Senate never actually passed a new map for New Hampshire back when they were doing that a couple of years ago. New map could be passed. It could favor Republicans. You could pick up a seat here in New Hampshire. You said in a recent interview that the timing is off with that. Are you willing to sign a new map into law?
Listen, Adam, we're already like halfway through the census. I believe if the legislature was going to act on this, they should have already acted on this. So we're heading into the next census already. We're like halfway through. I do think the timing is off for this.
All right. Governor-elect Kelly Ayotte, thanks so much for your time on Close Up. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Adam.